Hello guys, this is Panzermeister36. In today's video, we are going to be looking at how I painted and chipped this nice Dragon Tiger 1 with Zimmerit in 1/35 scale. In the video, we are going to be looking at how I applied the camouflage pattern, which is the basic German yellow with stripes of wrought brown, which is the typical camouflage of this unit, the 506 Schwer sPzAbt. We're also going to be looking at using some chipping fluid to expose underlying colors. So we're going to get the nice light ochre of Zimmerit showing through and also red primer showing through. This gives us some nice chipping effects and leaves our tank with a nice worn finish at the same time as we paint the camouflage pattern, so it can speed up some of the weathering. In addition, I'm also going to look at painting the markings on this tank. That includes using some masks on the numbers here, which are very useful over the Zimmerit areas, and I also show my use of a decal on the rear of the turret for the unit marking. So let's get started. Here's our tank with the completed assembly stage essentially, and nothing more. As you can see, we have a lot of different finishes on our tank here. We have different paint colors on there. We've got additions on the back of plastic, resin, and metal. We've got metal details on the top here for the engine deck vents. We've got a metal gun barrel as well. We've got some brass there. We've got metal details on the front and also some metal tracks. There's a lot of different stuff going on here. So for that reason, I decided to actually prime the model. I don't do this often, but I'm doing a lot more now. And I'm using some MIG Ammo one-shot primer, which is Badger Stynylrez primer. However, first I want to show you guys a trick for mounting details temporarily for painting. So I'm going to use masking fluid. This is going to be used to temporarily attach the cupola and the turret bin to the model so I can paint them, but then leave them separately for painting later. So I'm just going to apply some of it to the contact area, and you just hold it in place for like 10 seconds, and there we go, it's in place. Some people like to use white glue for this. However, I try to use masking fluid because white glue can be kind of brittle, and so if you bump the part, it can come off. Masking fluid is more ductile. As you can see, it can take a hit, and the part just moves a little bit, it doesn't snap off. I'm also going to remove my metal tracks, because I want to weather these separately using some burnishing fluid, which we will look at later on in another video, but these aren't going to be painted with the airbrush. I'm also going to remove all the row wheels, and I can see why interleaved row wheels are a maintenance nightmare, because it's even hard to take them off a plastic model for painting. Each wheel has to have the wheels next to it taken off, and those wheels have to have the wheels next to them taken off, and it's just a pain in the butt. So luckily I'm not a Tiger repair guy. Alright, let's start with the primer. As I was saying before, this is rebranded Badger Stynylrez primer, which is basically the best primer you can ever imagine because you just shake it, pour it in your airbrush cup, and that's it. No thinner, and you just kind of blast it on at like 25 psi. It's really, really forgiving, and it's really, really nice primer for this reason. I'm going to use black here because that way I can paint this into all the nooks and crannies. And then even if I miss those areas later with my German yellow, all you'll see is the black showing through, which simulates a shadow. Also, this primer really, really flattens out no matter how heavy you apply it, so you can afford to really layer it on here and get in all the gaps and all the little nooks and crannies, and it will flatten out even if you apply a little bit too much. So like I said, this is excellent primer. And here's our model with the black applied. The next step is going to be to apply some actual red primer color. I'm going to use a mix of about half and half XF68 and XF7 from Tamiya. And I've thinned it about 60% with some lacquer thinner. I'm going to apply this to all the areas that historically would be painted with the metallic red oxide primer color. So essentially that's everywhere that's not Zimmerit. We're going to expose this color later with some chipping effects, so you don't need to go crazy with your application here. I just want there to be some red to chip through. So I'm just applying it to everywhere where I'm going to have some chipping effects. Some areas aren't going to have chipping effects, so I don't bother to paint this there. I can leave the black showing, it's no problem. As I said, I'm thinning it about 60% with lacquer thinner, and it's a half and half mix of each paint. I'm probably airbrushing at about 15 psi with a 0.5 needle. With the red oxide applied, I'm now going to paint the Zimmerit areas. My mix here is 50% XF78 and 50% XF2. My aim here is for a light ochre color that is still light enough to be visible through my German yellow at the end, as you can see on the bottom. I'm doing the same thing here, about 60% thinner, lacquer thinner, and about 15 psi, and the same airbrush 0.5 needle. And now I'm applying this to all the areas that are Zimmerit. This is the anti-magnetic mine paste that's applied to the sides of the tank. Now I don't need to be too precise here, because not all like the little corners are going to get chipped up. I mean, exposed edges, they will get chipped, and flat areas where the crew's going to walk around. But kind of like the hidden corners, those areas aren't really going to get chipped, so I don't really worry about those too much. I can simply leave the black paint showing through in those areas. And I'm also trying not to paint over my red oxide primer, because most of the chipping is going to be to red oxide primer. In a couple of areas there was some overspray, so I simply touched these up with a paintbrush and my red oxide primer mix again. So the fender hangers there, top of the manlet, so on. Historically, this is how the tank would look before the German yellow was applied. So I'm going to spray on 2 thin coats of AK heavy chipping fluid with my airbrush, same airbrush as before. And I don't thin this, I just spray it on at about 20 psi. 2 thin coats is all you need. And once your model has a slightly shiny finish, as you can see here, you know you have good coverage. With my 2 thin coats of chipping fluid now dry, I can apply my German dark yellow color. Everybody likes the old XF60, but Tamiya has released a new color, XF88, which, as you can see, XF60 is darker, XF88 is lighter. So I'm going to do a base coat of XF60, the old color, because it's a little bit darker, and then I'm going to paint some highlights with the XF88 to get a more accurate, lighter color. This is XF60, like I said, my base coat, and it's thinned more like 70% thinner instead of the 60% I was doing before. I'm also using X20A thinner, which is the standard Tamiya acrylic thinner, not lacquer thinner, because I want the paint to be easier to chip, and lacquer thinner makes the paint a little bit harder to chip because it gives a more durable finish. So for that reason, I'm now using X20A acrylic thinner. And I'm simply spraying this on at about 15 psi, making sure I build up my finish in a couple of thin passes, not one big overall coat, because then I'm going to flood the detail. Now I'm applying the XF88. This is the lighter new color. As you can see, I'm applying it in a bit of a marbly finish, just to make a little bit of variation to the plain German yellow. This color is not that much lighter, but it is a little bit lighter, so I'm trying to be a little bit fancy here and kind of highlight some hatches with it. You saw me highlighting the bow machine gun before. Here I'm highlighting some more exposed things on the engine. But overall I did a little bit of the marbling, which you can probably see on the top of the turret here. That's the area where it was most visible, which is good because it's a very boring flat area. So here's the result of the overall German yellow finish. I think it looks pretty good. You can also notice that some areas are still black, like the backs of the wheels. Actually, some of them are still red from the primer color, bottom of the turret, and also the hull sides below the fenders. I don't bother painting them with yellow or red because it just looks like a shadow right now and it's going to be covered with mud later. With the base German yellow applied, we can paint our camouflage color. My mix is going to be about 1 part XF72 and 2 parts XF68. This will give me a red color, but not anything that's too red. I don't want it to look like red primer. This is supposed to be the German rot brown camouflage color, whatever it's called. I've thinned this even more, probably at least 80% thinner, and I'm spraying it on much lower PSI, probably more like 10 PSI, as low as I can get. And once again, this is thinned with Tamiya X20A thinner, not lacquer thinner, because it's easier to chip when you use acrylic thinner. So painting camouflage is a bit of a tricky process. It's best to do a bunch of little, well, I can't really call them brush strokes, but like spray strokes. You don't want to do big sweeps of the airbrush to get wide bands, because that looks out of scale. You want to paint it in a bunch of little little curves and little movements that more simulate the actual reach of a 1/35th scale man when he's painting this onto the tank. The camouflage I'm applying here is what was usually applied to the tanks of this unit. There are not many photos of this tank in particular, so most of this I kind of made up, but there's enough photos of the whole unit that I can get a good idea of what the overall pattern's like. Don't be afraid to go back and apply a couple of touch-ups later to make sure you get in all the little cracks, but overall camouflage painting is a little bit easy once you get the hang of it and thin your paints more than you think you need to. And like I said, the key to a good realistic camouflage pattern is to make sure that your spray movements are nice and small. That way your camouflage looks like it's in scale and looks like it's been painted on by a very small man. And I'm sure somebody knows this already. Yes, I did go back and touch up the area here that would have been masked by the fender in real life. Here's a result of our camouflage pattern. I'm actually very happy with the result here. I'm getting a lot more experience with painting camouflages lately, and my results are improving a lot. So if you're nervous about this, all you gotta do, get more practice, and it makes it a lot easier. Now remember, beforehand we applied the chipping fluid. This was before the camouflage colors, but after the primer in Zimmerit. Therefore, we can activate the chipping fluid using a little bit of water and a soft brush. Simply rub at areas where you'd like some chipping effects to occur. The water will soak through the top layers of paint, and it will encounter the chipping fluid and dissolve it, which then reveals the underlying colors, which are the Zimmerit or the red oxide primer colors. You can also use a sPzAbt stick or a skewer, whatever you want to call this, and simply scrape at the model. You can get a lot finer chipping effects using that. I like to use the sPzAbt stick for a little kind of like scrapes on angled surfaces to simulate the crew sliding up and down, maybe dragging ammunition boxes up into the turret, something like that. This is good for longer scrapes. Usually I try to keep my chipping in areas where it makes the most sense. That includes the edges of the turret and also areas near the hatches, because this is the areas where the crew would walk around the most, and therefore these areas would see the most wear and tear. I don't put chipping in random areas like the bottom of the bottom of like the sides of the hull or like the gun. Those areas don't really get that worn. But for example, all the areas around here where the crew is walking to access the tools and access the front hatches for the bow gunner and the driver, these areas are accessed multiple times per day, so they would see a lot more wear and tear. So I can simply rub at the edges with my wet brush, and the chipping effects will naturally begin to occur thanks to our chipping fluid. It's pretty easy to overdo this effect by just going crazy. Just be gentle and use a little bit of water on your brush and a smaller brush, and just think about each area you're chipping. Kind of doesn't make sense. Should there be chipping here? So you see here I'm chipping the tool handles because those are used pretty frequently, but some areas don't really have any chipping because it doesn't make sense. Like the rear of the hull, there's no chipping there, but the tool clamps for the jack, there's chipping there because those areas are used frequently. While I was chipping to areas that were meant to expose the Zimmerit color, I realized that I probably should have used a lighter color because it was difficult to see it showing through the yellow. But on areas that were the brown camouflage stripes, you can actually see it showing through pretty well. So luckily, it was not a waste of time, but if I were to do this again, I would want to use a lighter Zimmerit color. Here's the result of our camouflage, which is now chipped. I do love using chipping fluid or hairspray to get these effects, because it means that after you've painted your model, you basically get your chipping effects in the same stage. So you have, this is the point where I'd apply a wash essentially. Everything is already laid out. The painting kind of comes pre-worn for you. And you do get these very, very nice in-scale chips, which are almost impossible to get with a brush unless you're maybe Martin Kovac and you can do this brush chipping insanely well, make it look really easy too. But I do love my chipping fluid effects because it's a lot faster than getting super fine chips by a brush, and like I said, you get a very nice result. So next up, we're going to apply some markings to our tank. I ordered this Alliance Model Works mask set a while ago, and I think since then Alliance Model Works is out of production because their website doesn't restock anything now, which is a little bit sad, but anyways, I got this mask set. It has the nice number 1 that I need, and it has the unit marking, but it's like 6 parts, and there's no way I would be able to mask that and make it all lined up. It would be a disaster. So luckily, I have a decal. This is not my decal, this is Adam Mann's decal. He didn't need it, but this is from a different Tiger kit. It's a mid-production Tiger from the same unit, but it still does the trick. So this is why I left the turret bin removable, and I didn't bother with a gloss varnish. I simply sanded the rear face with about 2000 grit sandpaper until it was a little bit shiny, because all you need to avoid silvering is setting solution and a smooth finish. So I put the decal in some warm water for about a minute. I applied microsol beforehand. I think you're supposed to use microset for one of these stages, but I use microsol for both. Doesn't matter. And then now I can remove the decal from the water. I wipe off most of the water from the paper, and I can transfer it to the rear of the turret. I use some water to refloat it so I can adjust the position a little bit. After a lot of adjusting, I finally get it to a position in which I like, and now I apply another coat of microsol. Like I said, there's microset which you're supposed to use for one of these 2 stages before or after. I just use microsol for both, and it works perfectly fine. As you can see, I didn't even need a gloss varnish. Now I'm going to paint the masks. I just taped the mask in place with some masking tape, and now I'm spraying with some Tamiya XF2 flat white, thin like 70%. And there we go, looks pretty awesome. And immediately after I painted them, I just scraped them a little bit when the paint's still a little bit wet, I guess. Just scraping with a toothpick to get a little bit of a worn look to the masks. Now masks are great. They look better than decals ever can, and you don't have to worry about the setting solution or silvering, and they're also really useful over Zimmerit because it looks painted on. As you can see, the decal, it looks good, not nearly as good as the masks do, but I just didn't want to bother with that like 6-part multi-piece mask. That would have been a disaster. As you can see, there's no silvering. You don't need to worry about a gloss varnish. All you need is smooth paint and setting solution. And with that, our tank is completely painted. And also, by using chipping fluid, we have some chipping effects built into our finish already. I'm very pleased with my results here. My Tiger is looking awesome. By the way, this is my first Tiger ever, so I'm pretty excited. I can finally call myself a real modeler, I guess. But there we go, you can see the Zimmerit chipping there looks pretty good. My red primer chipping also looks really good here. This is the stuff you get with the shish kebab stick by scraping. And the brush chipping with the chipping fluid also looks really, really good and in scale. And also, like I said, masks are amazing for painting because give you a very nice painted on look. Decals are also useful, and you don't need a gloss varnish. Stop wasting your time. Anyways, that's about it for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something new. I do hope you're enjoying my Tiger here. I'm having a lot of fun painting and weathering it. Next week, I will be probably looking at applying a pin wash to this tank to highlight the details and give it some nice kind of like fake emphasis and shadows and stuff like that. Until then, stay safe out there, guys. Don't get sick. Stay home. Stay isolated. And I guess watch some modeling videos and have some more bench time if you can. As always, any questions or comments, post them on below. I will try to reply to as many as I can. And also, huge thanks to my Patreon supporters. Those guys really help me making these videos by supporting me so I can buy the paints and products you guys see. Anyways, goodbye, happy modeling. I will see you next week.